Tiago. I'm the last PhD candidate of this day. And for this work, Don Marco Locatelli is the advisor, and Manuel Iori the co-advisor. We also had a collaboration with Mario Moreira from Brazil and José Fernando from Portugal. And our work is entitled Algorithm for Current and Technical Problems. Well, we address two main problems, so I divide my talk into two main parts, pilot building problem and rectangular cutting problem. And for each part, I will discuss these topics and in the end, the overall conclusion. Well, let's start pilot building problem, or PBP. For this problem, the proposal arose from a real-world application subject to non-trivial constraints. And the idea came from an Italian company for automation production process. I highlighted didn't have a partnership with this company. They only gave us their database to develop this research. And about the process, they consider several ones, but our interest is in picking and packing. What is this? This is the task of creating palettes for individual 3D items. This problem is also called distributors palette loading, where a palette is composed of blocks from different customers, because in general a single customer cannot afford the whole palette. And it's required a proper packing that speeds up load and unload operations. But why do you need a proper arrangement of items? Let me give you an example to understand this situation. This man must unload a single pallet as soon as possible. And he must transport similar items to different places. And to do that, he should use this machine, this transfer machine. So we analyze here two cases. The first case, the pallet has items arranged in these positions. It's very easy to unload this pallet because the items are continuous. And now we have the second case, the exact same items, but in a different disposition. In this case, he must go around the pallet to unload the items, and additionally, he might not see the item in the middle of the pallet because it's surrounded by different items. So in this case, it will be harder to unload this pallet. And this simple case shows us how important it is to have a proper arrangement of items when considering specific needs. Okay. So great. Let's start building a pallet to understand the whole problem. A pallet has a base and is created by placing items on there until it's filled up. We could create a pallet with different items in this way, but which one will be the best? In most cases, we don't know this answer. However, we have the conditions to do that are all items should be placed on a pallet in such a way that the constraints are fulfilled, and the number of pallets used should be as low as possible. So the key is to understand the constraints of the problem. And so let's do that. The first constraint regards the base ones, and we address no overlap constraints, isolating by space and rotations. We also have more complex constraints. Q factor relates to the required utilization percentage of a specific surface. For example, these cups have different Q factor values, and stackability relates to the item disposition on pallets, which restricts how items can be put on top of each object, and the practical constraints. But before I explain them, I present the family concept to separate items. A family is a generalization of a concept. For example, the glass family, while type is its specification. For example, mugs, cups, wine cups. That is, objects made of glass. But why is this concept important? There are several reasons. First, it allows to divide the pallets in smaller parts by using layer levels within items of the same family. This pallet, for example, is composed by 3 levels, and this division simplifies the algorithm to create a pallet. But why do you place items of the same family on the same layer? Because it emulates the stability constraint, since items of the same family have similar height and weight, not necessarily equal, but very similar. So to avoid this situation, unstable polyps, layers composed by those items tend to create more stable polyps, the perfect situation. Okay? So based on the composition of layers, we divide them into types. First, we have the single item layers composed by items of the same type and the same family. Also, single family layers composed by the same family. We have the same items of the same family, but the types can be different here. And an exception, each part may have one layer and one composed by multiple families. And this layer is called residual layer. Okay, that said, the family concept defines the layer disposition. First, items of the same type must be contiguous, and at least one item of a group must be visible from the board. I give you an example. Consider this figure. The first two meet both requirements, as you can check. On the other hand, the last two fail to meet at least one of them. Okay? And finally, the type of layers defines the palette disposition. The first part is composed by the most stable layers, the single item layers. The second part, in the middle of the palette, we have the single family layers, and finally, to close the palette, the residual layer. And that's going to conclude the definition of the problem that we have. To solve problems related to the PVT, the literature presents several approaches. For example, surveys, and this one in bold presents a collection of state-of-the-art technique heuristics. To construct solution by using constructive heuristics is very common to use these approaches, and we base our algorithm on this work in bold. It's very common to use a two-step solution as well. First layers and then palettes, and heuristic that use 3D items is also frequently used, and this work involved is the closest to ours. However, the goal of all papers here is on optimizing the two-factor of pilots. In this case, we propose to go beyond that goal by meeting the contiguity and visibility constraints. To achieve this, we propose four main strategies, these ones, and all of them are based on the two-step heuristic, creating first layers and then pilots. Now I go into detail for each of them. The first solution method is our base algorithm called